Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 5 of our xAPI cohort. I am David Kelly, the CEO of the Learning Guild, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to week 5 of this cohort. It's been a great experience so far. I've really been energized by seeing all of the sharing and collaboration that's been going on in the Slack channel, some of the projects that are going on there, as well as all the learning that's taking place in these weekly sessions. Before we get started, I want to go through a couple, couple of announcements, a couple of quick updates before we welcome our speaker for today. First and foremost, I just want to reach out to anyone who's in the being affected right now by Hurricane Ian in the Southwest, in the Florida region. We've all seen it on the news. A lot of damage that's going on there, and our thoughts are with those that are affected by it. If you'd like, just as an aside, if you'd like to find ways to help those that are impacted, there's a lot of organizations that do good work to do that. I'm going to put a quick link into chat. Just got a good article on different organizations that do work to help people that are impacted by things like this. So if you looking for ways to help, that's a great article to check out. So again, I hope everyone is safe and well with that. So a couple of updates related to the cohort before we get started with today's session. First, I want to remind everyone some of the other resources that you have around diving into xAPI. We've got a couple of things that are going on at DevLearn next month in Las Vegas. We have our xAPI user conference, which is going to be a full day dedicated to exploring xAPI. We've got case studies, we've got wonderful experts from within the field who are going to share tactical examples of how to put xAPI into practice. We have our xAPI innovation showcase called xAPI Hyperdrive, where people are going to be sharing their examples of how they're applying it in their organization. Each one gets a 10-minute pitch session to share what they're doing, and there will be a judged competition. And the ones that get the highest score based on the judges' scoring will be recognized as the xAPI Hyperdrive winners. And we are currently accepting applications for xAPI Hyperdrive. They'll be accepted through October 7th. I will put a link into chat once I'm done here with the opening remarks here, where you can get additional information and submit your application. If anyone has any questions at the end of every session, there are tables where you can connect with each other. Right outside in the lobby of the AirMeet platform. There'll be one labeled xAPI at DevLearn. I'll be at that table till the top of the hour. Anyone who has any questions about what's going on at DevLearn, about Hyperdrive, how you participate, or any other comments you want to have around how the Guild supports the xAPI community, feel free to join me at that table and ask any of those questions. But again, if you want to participate in xAPI Hyperdrive, October 7th is the deadline to get your application in. I also remind you there are a host of huge resources that are available through the Learning Guild to further your development in xAPI, between research reports, articles, all sorts of things that are available there. If you're not a member already, make sure you go to learningguild.com. It's a free membership. Get lots of great resources. And our website was recently updated, so you can actually bookmark things that are there to your account so you can reference them later. So you can build your own xAPI development library just by, if you find something that's valuable you want to reference later, you can add it to your library. So make sure if you don't have a membership there, you visit us at learningguild.com and join today. Again, completely free to become a member of the Guild. So with that, I want to bring today's session. We've had a number of great sessions through the first third of 4 sessions, the first third of this cohort. And we have another one here today with Jason Haig from Vertical Technology Consultants, who's going to be going through understanding and implementing xAPI profiles. We're thrilled to have him here today. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here today. The floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, David. Appreciate the introduction. That's Veracity Technology Consultants, by the way. Sorry about that. Probably got misspelled there. Let me share my screen. And let me know when you guys can see this. Okay.
We're good.
Good. Okay. All right. Thanks, David, again for the introduction and to the Guild team. A little more about myself in this presentation on profiles. So I'm a co-founder of Veracity with 3 other former veterans of the ADL initiative. We played a big role in SCORM and xAPI while we were there and continue to support those standards today through active participation through community activities such as the cohort. And, also one of our co-founders, John Paultrack, is the chair of the IEEE working group to make xAPI an official IEEE standard. I'm also involved with the IEEE xAPI profiles group as well. And our team at Veracity helped build the ADL Learning Record Store Conformance Test Suite while we were at the ADL initiative. So As you know, we also have an LRS product, Veracity Learning. So we've been building out several profiles for customers over the past few years, and we've invested a ton of time in our professions into profiles in general. Ever since the start of the profile working group, going back to July of 2015, actually. So got a lot of experience and resources and tips to share with you all today on generally understanding profiles and how you can implement or reuse them, and then how they can also best support your reporting goals and xAPI strategy. So let's get into it. What is a profile? So our first question for those of you that are new to xAPI, you may not have heard of a profile, but maybe you know the basics about xAPI. And by the way, this presentation is kind of directed at those that are maybe new to xAPI, but also have heard of profiles, have a little experience, but maybe not the technical underpinnings. So for those of you that like definitions, here's the official technical definition of a profile from ADL. It's the human or machine readable documentation of application-specific concepts, extensions, and statement templates used when implementing xAPI in a particular context. So what exactly does ADL's definition mean when it says a profile supports both human readability and machine readability? Well, a good analogy is a credit card. If you think about a credit card, it has a human readable side on the front, such as your name, your card, your expiration date, so forth. And on the back, there's usually a magnetic strip. And nowadays, it's also in the microchip. There's additional machine understandable information that only card readers can process. The big goal with machine readability is semantic interoperability, which is the ability for computers and computer systems to share and exchange data with shared meaning and understanding. And that is really a big goal of profiles. So I'm going to put aside that formal technical definition from ADL and try to help with understanding the big picture of profiles. In a nutshell, a profile is your blueprint for implementing xAPI consistently, which is really important for your analytics and your reporting strategy, and for doing reporting later on. If you think about it, you wouldn't build a house without an architectural blueprint, so you shouldn't implement xAPI without first looking at existing profiles. And profiles are standard implementations of xAPI. They help you establish common vocabulary and semantics and determine what should be captured and understood by an LRS to help you meet your reporting requirements. Thinking back several years ago, this was actually how the statement requirements for the video profile were realized. For example, there was an xAPI video community of practice. We met regularly for several months. Similar to how those of you in the cohort are doing now. Kind of groups are forming organically with different goals to do different things around xAPI. Same thing happened in the early days of xAPI. There were communities of practice that formed to come up with these profiles. Well, there was one that formed around video. And one of the goals we had were to define the reporting requirements for different types of video engagement, such as and identifying the need for a video histogram or a heat map that showed where users would fall off or only watch specific segments of a video. And the heat map visualization was the driver, but this type of engagement with a video could also be correlated to how learners performed in a test that measured a specific learning or performance objective in that particular segment of the video. So this is just a screen capture right here from an old resource that we used for thinking through the use cases for particular requirements for statements in the video profile while we're participating in the video community of practice several years ago. As you can see, some of the things you typically define in use case are like the actor, preconditions, and so forth. And then you arrive at the requirements for what your statements are or what they're going to should be focused around. After the community of practice created the use cases and requirements for tracking, we then published this human readable version of the profile. This document has all the statement requirements and vocabulary that should be used when tracking video interactions. This human readable version is, my opinion, even more important than that machine readable version that we'll get into here in a minute. And why? Because the human readable version is useful for designers and developers that need to look up or reuse and implement the standard statement requirements for xAPI. There are several existing profiles out there already that provide guidelines for implementing xAPI for a specific type of content or in a particular context. For example, there's already profiles for courses, assessment, games, video, ebooks, performance support, simulations, just to name a few. There's several others. Here, I'll provide a link to where you can look at some of those. Here's the URL for the profile server from ADL. This should be your starting point, really, when looking at xAPI and profiles. You should look at what's already out there and try to reuse it rather than reinvent the wheel. And several LRS providers already offer some useful dashboards and reports over data that uses profiles. Unfortunately, you can't assume that the commercial authoring tools on the market support profiles very well, though. From what I've seen, many of them do not, but many of them do allow you to configure the xAPI output so you can send better data. So if you have the opportunity to do so, I recommend configuring the authoring tools if you can to send better data that's consistent with existing profiles. Another recommended resource here for profiles is Torrance Learning's Profile Viewer. I think this tool is very helpful because it displays the statement requirements and optional elements in an appealing bulletized format for each profile. And this has often been the fallback resource this cohort group and others have used when the ADL resources are not accessible. So check that one out as well. Oh yeah, and if you need to create a profile, here my last bullet, I recommend starting with a template. I'll get into that in just a moment too. But first I want to point out that the xAPI profile specification is very technical and incorporates JSON linked data as a requirement. In the past, it was highly error prone and very manual to generate these JSON LD files for a profile. So, and I don't recommend trying to do that, speaking from personal experience, trying to hand jam and create some kind of JSON LD document for a profile. This is one of the primary reasons that the ADL developed this profile server resources. So you can now more easily create the machine readable data for profiles using a GUI. But the real goal here with a profile server is to reuse existing profiles and statement templates. It's still somewhat of a learning curve to author a profile from scratch and requires a technical understanding of the profile spec. So you should really try to focus on searching and reusing statement templates from existing profiles when you can and starting to create a whole new one. In many cases, you might only need to reuse some of the data from a statement template and will not require reusing an entire profile for your project sometimes. You may need to mix and match requirements from multiple profiles for your project also. And the profile server provides a search option to search over existing concepts and statements and templates for use. Concepts are things such as verbs, activity types, and extensions. So in the screen capture here, you see I'm searching for anything with the term viewed, and the results return concepts, such as I mentioned, such as verbs, context extensions, activity types. This example right here returns verbs and context extensions from the video profile. And if you look a little further down, there are also some results that are statement templates from existing profiles. From the results here, you can see that there are 5 results for statement templates containing the viewed verb. And there's a viewed statement template in the flashcards profile, a statement template for viewing a page in the Navy Common Reference profile, and a statement template for viewing a step and viewing a procedure from the performance support profile. The term viewed is also part of the description of the completed statement template in the CMI5 profile. So as you can see, these results include metadata searches over both the title of the template and the description of that template. So it's a pretty useful tool for searching. And here's a screenshot of the Torrance Learning's profile viewer I mentioned earlier. I think this tool is really helpful, as I mentioned, because it kind of pulls in the template requirements across profiles into one nice bulletized summary. Let's see. This tool from Torrance Learning also is a nice resource, as I mentioned earlier, in case the ADL's profile server is down and not accessible. All right, now I'd like to talk to you about the human readable aspect of profiles and why I think this is actually should be your initial focus if you ever plan to create a profile. from scratch. While ADL's profile server on the prior slides I was just showing you makes it a little easier to turn your profile into a machine readable JSON LD document, it's actually still quite complicated to author one if you don't understand the concepts and details of the spec. It's really a better practice and more helpful for everyone if you create a human readable document outside the profile server first. Developers that implement your requirements will definitely appreciate this document too, because it's easier to read and understand. And human readable document can be more easily referenced as an official contracting requirement than as a machine readable document, if you think about that as well. And you must have a machine readable document if you're creating a profile anyway. There's actually a metadata field in the profile specification where you're supposed to link to a human readable version. That's what's circled. This yellow circled link on this screen is the link to the human readable version. So if you do browse around and find some profiles on the ADL profile server, make sure you look at this tab called profile details, where you can sometimes go and get a human readable version. If you are to create a human readable profile, I recommend starting with a document format that's easily accessible and editable, such as Microsoft Word or even a Google Doc. I created a template for you all that you can use as a starting point and download if here at this shortened URL. I believe I shared this out on the Slack channel with some of the groups last phase. I know Brian Duck and some of his teams have been looking heavily at profiles and created a primer as well. But my company, Veracity, we recently documented several profiles using this approach for our clients and made this template available as a free resource. It provides you with like a bulletized list of the requirements for each statement, and then provides an area to draft a statement example based on those requirements below that. So I think these requirements can help form the foundation of your statement templates in a profile. Really, this bulletized list here, as you see on this screen capture, it's initializing an application. If you go down under the requirements, it's a set actor to this, set verb to this, set object to this, and then gets into some of the other properties, context extensions, context registration, some important pieces of data in a statement that really need to be set that are often overlooked. Okay, let's see. And if you need to create a new profile, you can still use, the ADL profile server or Torrance Learning's profile flattener viewer to help identify and select the concepts and the statement templates you may want to reuse as input into your profile document. But in a nutshell, the workflow is much smoother if you work in your own document first, define your requirements up front. And oftentimes, you might not be the only one working on a profile. As in the case with the cohort, you may be collaborating on one with other folks. So having something that multiple people can concurrently edit is very helpful too. There are a few profiles on the ADL profile server that use this human readable template, such as the performance support profile. In case you would like to see the end result, you saw that link on the prior screen. If you want to see kind of like how it's organized and so forth. And finally, if you're creating a profile from scratch and plan to submit it to the ADL profile server, then creating this human readable version up front actually makes it a lot easier to go back and publish it to the ADL profile server later, because you can simply copy and paste the information from your document into the ADL profile server interface. Now, while I've mostly focused on how you can implement and reuse profiles so far, I'd like to switch over now and briefly talk about how you can use profiles to support your reporting strategy. The big picture here is evaluation and determining whether learning content is effective and doing the job it was designed to do. Profiles can help with your evaluation strategy and provide a better way for you to identify your data collection requirements or align your requirements to existing statement templates. And I'll be giving a more in-depth presentation on this topic at the xAPI User Conference on October 25th. The xAPI User Conference is a pre-conference workshop at this year's DevLearn conference in Las Vegas. You can find out more about that at devlearn.com. I think David mentioned this earlier. And what do I mean here? And by my title, don't just give me all the data. Well, given the focus on big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence in recent years, I'm sure many of you heard the phrase, don't just give me all the data. Instead, my presentation is focused on just the opposite. Don't just give me all the data. Instead, I want to be very intentional about what data is collected. So I'm going to talk about how you can use xAPI for training effectiveness evaluation and using frameworks such as the Kirkpatrick model to align your reporting goals and measures with your xAPI data collection requirements. After all, this is why we should be using xAPI in the first place, right? So we want to evaluate learning outcomes and make sure they're improving performance or making an impact on our business or mission objectives. We don't have enough time to cover everything in that presentation today, but at DevLearn, I'll be sharing this approach and a free resource for aligning your organization's reporting goals and specific measures with xAPI data and xAPI profiles. Requires a lot of time up front for careful planning, but ultimately it can save you some valuable time, and you'll definitely have more useful data to analyze later on. The attributes in the columns of this table provide a way for you to think about how to organize and align your reporting goals with corresponding measures, feedback loops, reporting options, and xAPI data collection requirements. For example, what is reporting goal? What is the reporting goal or target requirement identified by stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders in your organization? Are they your customers? Are they the CLOs? Maybe you yourself are a stakeholder. What are the reporting goals? And then what are the KPI measures used to track progress towards those reporting goals? And what is the purpose of the measure? What are some of the feedback loops? In other words, what feedback will be provided from the measure? Think about some reasons for measuring, if we want to inform, monitor, analyze, or manage. And then reporting and analytics, what are some of the types of reports or analytics we could create? Some dashboards, graphs, charts, tables. What is the assessment technique? And this is really looking at kind of level 2, Kirkpatrick model level 2. What are the types of assessment instruments that will be used? Pre-test, post-test, etc. Key xAPI data, and then what are the data model elements or specific profiles that we can leverage to support the measure and reporting goal. I have an example from that resource I'm going to share. This is just a few samples. I've got a much larger table of these measures. I think that will be useful for everyone. There's one in here for pre-test pass rate, practice test pass rate, post-test pass rate. You can compare the results of these tests to kind of see if progress is being made, if the training is effective or the learning content's effective. Again, these areas or attributes that I mentioned in the table are broken down. And these measures from this resource really are intended to align from the Kirkpatrick model level 2, as I mentioned. But last week, I wrote an in-depth article on this topic for Learning Solutions Magazine. I think that'll be shared in the cohort Slack channel later on when it's published. But if you look at the column on the far right, the key xAPI data, if we're wanting to do any kind of analysis, the key things to look at are initializing and terminating assessment. That marks when an assessment is started and stopped. And then the other piece is responding to assessment questions. There's several different types of questions that can be responded to. Those are defined in CMI.interaction piece of the data model. But there's lots of other pieces of data in here that you can see are very valuable for being able to report and evaluate these measures. Result success, result completion, the score, timestamp, the relationship of the assessment item to the assessment question. All of those were things that need to be thought through and documented before they can be reported on. In addition to identifying measures of effectiveness, xAPI is also valuable for measuring efficiency. Efficiency measures are typically focused on quantity, things such as like how much or duration, things such as how long. And they also include data related to understanding access, volume, and reach. Measuring quantity and duration is I think the perfect starting point for most organizations, because they're probably the most reported on efficiency measures. And measuring the efficiency of performance support solutions will enable a feedback loop that allows stakeholders to monitor access and usage. And this approach uh, can really help identify when users are having trouble locating the right content when they need it to perform, or even if they are having trouble finding the content at all. These are all measures that can be reported on because the data is already defined in existing profiles. As you see on the right, you've got performance support profile, video profile. There's a lot of other measures. As I mentioned, I could spend a whole hour getting into those alone. Something else I wanted to mention here when thinking about your data collection requirements is to pay careful attention to designing and generating quality xAPI statements. Profiles are all about sending consistent data, but also you want to send better data when possible. So think quality over quantity. I published another article in Learning Solutions magazine 2 years ago that discusses best practices for xAPI statements. So these practices are based on some of the most common inconsistencies that we've seen over the years, as an LRS vendor, and if addressed in a proactive manner, can significantly improve the quality of your data and your reporting. Anyhow, check out the link at this bottom of the screen for more details on that and the benefits of following these practices. If you're not following a specific profile, I think these tips will at least help improve the quality of your xAPI statements. And so here's some of the resources I shared. The ADL's profile server, which I mentioned earlier, can be accessed at profiles.adlnet.gov. Torrance Learning's profile viewer. The human readable template I mentioned earlier, which I think is a great starting point before you even think about generating your first statement, or opening up an authoring tool and generating xAPI data and going and looking at an LRS. Often you might find you're a little underwhelmed by the quality of the data that gets generated by default by some of those tools, and maybe you should think through exactly what your reporting requirements are, define those in a human readable template. And when doing so, if you have control over the quality of the data that gets submitted, if you can't use profiles, here's some best practices for generating better quality data. Okay, I think that's it. That's my slides. I'm not sure if any questions came up. I've been trying to look back at the chat here. Oh, I'm switching back over here now. Question in the Q&A about vocabularies and profiles. Let me see. Okay, I think I see a question here from Charlotte Sharp. I think I'd benefit from seeing a statement side by side with a profile. Okay. Yeah, let's see if I can pull something up here, Charlotte. Basically, a profile is the requirements for a statement. So it probably would be useful to show you a statement that references a profile. Let's see if I can pull one of those up here in a moment. There's a link to all the details of the user conference. Yes, let's see. I'm trying to find some questions here. This session should be way earlier in the cohort. It's really helping me. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks. I appreciate that. I think this other article I'm going to push out here soon will be helpful for everyone too. And often we jump into just generating xAPI data. We want that instant gratification, go look at an LRS, and really thinking about the bigger picture of the kind of the ADDIE process and the evaluation piece of the ADDIE model, which is the often most neglected part. And how are you going to evaluate the data later on? You really got to think about it up front rather than ad hoc. In a nutshell, I think that thinking about profiles as something you can reuse for your project and go out and look at how these statements have already been constructed in a standard way if you think about it, some of you that may just be starting out on xAPI, we've actually got about a 10-year history now. So a lot of people have been doing xAPI for a while. And rather than just create data, create statements about anything, you're going to get much better results and satisfaction if you create them and have your tools generate them in a way that all the LRSs are kind of expected to see, or in a way that the xAPI kind of requires you to create them. One thing we've seen a lot over the years too is xAPI statements with data being put in really weird places. Like there's already a place in the data model to put a score, result.score. We've seen implementations where people are putting scores in, context extensions and result extensions, and LRS vendors are expecting the data to be put in the parts of the model where that was designed for it. So if it's in some odd place, you're not going to see a really good chart or visualization. And sometimes we've seen authoring tools do that too, to be honest. So it's not necessarily anyone's particular's fault. It's just kind of how things have gone. All right. Let's see. Looking for Q&A. See Q&A section of platform separate from chat. Okay. Sorry about that. I've been looking at the chat the whole time. All right. Going back. Jeff Brown, any thoughts on creating profiles to capture Kirkpatrick level 3, like generating statements from Office systems about how users are interacting with those tools? Definitely, Jeff. That's a great question. I've been looking at this a lot, and often it is hard to prove that something that happened in level 2, people can actually do in level 3 on their job. To your point, a great example of that is maybe some software that someone uses on their job. In that particular use case, yeah, you could maybe infer that some training that someone got in the classroom or in training in general was making an impact in how they were doing their job. A lot of cases, it doesn't necessarily apply, and sometimes that's just kind of, I think, maybe something that's difficult in the Kirkpatrick model. Been doing some deep thought on this and research, and one way to really connect the dots between learning objectives and performance objectives and things that happen in level 2 and level 3 is to have xAPI statements link to those objectives in the statements. So that's something we've been looking at as well. It's a little bit more complicated than it sounds to be able to pull off. It requires the design and creation of learning objectives and those things to be assigned a unique identifier that can be referenced by an xAPI statements, and all of these other technical things in place in addition to just general businesses processes to kind of align by it. But that's a great question about Kirkpatrick level 3. A lot of thought on that. Khalid Al-Rimi, I don't have any new vocabularies, but collecting them from other profiles, but I need to collect them in one profile and make an example statement for LMSs to follow. Do I need to create a new profile in this case? No, I don't think you do. So, xAPI allows you to just use the statement templates from profiles. You can, if you think that your statement is going to need to be validated against a profile, then you need to reference that profile IRI and context activities category property. However, there is not really a formal ADL or other standard way to validate profiles beyond syntax validation of JSON data currently. So you really can mix and match if you have like a blended solution that may have statements from multiple types of content. Then you can totally blend vocabularies for your example statements and statement templates. Reuse those. Okay, I've got a question here from Charlotte Sharp. Can you give an example of contextual data in a profile? Sure. So a good example of this is the video profile. Actually, let me pull up my screen. Is my screen still being shared? Looks like it is. Okay.
Yes.
So let's go to profiles.adm.gov. I'll pull up an example here. I need to go to video profile. Yeah. So a good example of context data in a statement would be around, let's say you wanted to track how someone interacted with the closed caption button, or this changing the screen size, or changing the volume level, or skipping to a certain place in the video. There's some templates on here about interactions with video: initialize, plays, pause, seek, completed, terminated. Here's an example of context. So context extensions in a statement are just that. If you want to provide additional context around how they interacted with something, if you want to provide additional metadata about the result of something, there's a place for doing result extensions in a statement. If you want to provide additional metadata about an activity, there's an activity extension place in the xAPI statement data model. So let's look at this volume change one here. The verb, interacted, video, some of the rules. So here's some of the extensions and interacting with changing the volume. The time gets changed in the video, the volume, and the session ID. These are all different pieces of data. And the way this video profile was designed, it could work with any type of video player, but initially it was looking at, hey, what are the common types of video interactions in these players? And one specific reference implementation that was done was using the Video.js open source library. I think it's used by Brightcove or one of those, but we did it with the YouTube player, did it with other ones. But these are just common data elements, common across those video players, where you can control the data is being tracked. So hopefully that answers your questions. More context around the statement itself, what's going on in it. Another question here from Khalid: can I save lookup data in the LRS to save skills gained by courses, platform extra data to be used while creating reports? For example, I want to show students gain some specific skills by completing courses and having those skills. Yes, you can. There is additional data you can store in the other xAPI document endpoints. So xAPI statements are about somebody doing something. There is also activity profile, where you can store additional data about the activity itself. There's also actor profile, where you can store additional metadata about the actor and perhaps their skills. So I would look at those different document endpoints other than the xAPI statement model, rather than cramming those into extensions. That is what those other endpoints in xAPI are intended for. Another question here from Khalid: or show platform long name instead of short name provided inside the xAPI statement. Yeah, there's actually a property called platform, so you could actually put. I don't know how many character limits there are. I have to go look at the spec, but there is a property in xAPI statements for storing platform information. That looks like all the Q&A that has come up. I will switch back over to the chat. I don't see anything in here yet. How do you apply the profile to make everything work? Got a question from Chris Zimber. How do you apply the profile to make everything work? Once you have it, what do you do with it? The LRS, the authoring tool. Great question. So currently, the ADL profile server accepts profiles being submitted to it represented as JSON linked data. Really, a profile is, by the definition, documentation on how to implement xAPI for a certain context or rule. Ideally, more authoring tools would support these profiles out of the box. Unfortunately, the way things have happened with xAPI, it's not unfortunate, it was kind of by design, but the profiles did not get created start to get created until about 5 or 6 years after the spec was out. And that was to kind of spur innovation in the market, to get people to start adopting it early on. And it was a big success, and it did get early adoption. It's adopted internationally now. But formalizing the profiles takes a lot of work. You've got to get consensus on what pieces of data to collect and how it will look in a reporting tool and so forth. So the creation of profiles came kind of after the authoring tool started supporting xAPI, and they just haven't caught up yet. So fortunately, though, a lot of authoring tools have added support so that you can customize some of the output of xAPI. It does require a little bit of a technical expertise to go in and use JavaScript to modify what data gets generated based on different triggers and authoring tools. I think Paul Schneider may have covered that some in last week's presentation. But that essentially is how it works is profiles are a document to tell you how to implement xAPI for a certain type of content. It's totally optional, not required for profiles to be adopted yet. However, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are efforts to standardize the profile spec following the standardization of the core xAPI specification. So maybe with that standardization, you'll see more adoption by authoring tools and commercial solutions of profiles. But for the time being, these documents are out there and anyone can reuse and implement them.
Jason, thank you so much. I do see one more question that came through in the Q&A. I'm going to read it off to you as we still have a minute or so left in the time we have allocated. This is from Jeff Brown. Is anyone using xAPI to move outside of just training? Can we put together data from all kinds of areas via xAPI to support big data analysis of what patterns of behavior or career paths or activities other than formal training may predict success at our organization, such as on-the-job training activities, promotion, work products generated, community work, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen that xAPI, of course, can be used to track more than just training. There are a lot of neat implementations of it that have nothing to do with training. For example, we've seen one at Veracity where a particular customer is using it as a way to track interactions with their e-commerce solution that uses augmented reality. So, their statement design has nothing to do with looking at training effectiveness or anything like that. They're really looking at it from a more of a kind of Google Analytics standpoint. But yeah, to your additional questions, which is a very long question, I might add. Yeah, I think that is the whole intent of xAPI is to be able to aggregate this with other data sources. So if you can imagine, there are tons of data sources out there about the learner or the person. Think about human resources and all the different systems that have data points about the people, and aggregating the people data with learning outcome data and other sectors of an organization can lead to some pretty amazing things. That is part of what ADL and others are looking at, besides just xAPI, is defining these other data models and these other pieces. But today, out in the industry, there's already, especially big companies, they already have access to a lot of these other pieces of data. It's just a matter of getting the right people, the data scientists, to go out and aggregate those data points.
Excellent. Well, Jason, thank you again so much for taking the time to share with us here today. I see a lot of great conversations going on in chat, so I appreciate you inspiring the conversations that are going on there and helping us understand how to understand and implement the xAPI profiles. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that with us here today.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. I'll be on the cohort too if you have any follow-up questions or if I can help with anything. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everybody. And just as a reminder, if anyone wants to continue the discussions, we have tables available in the AirMeet lobby. I will also be at the table labeled xAPI at DevLearn if anyone has any questions about the user conference, about xAPI Hyperdrive, about anything that we have going on around xAPI within the Guild. Thanks so much for joining us for week 5. We'll see you all next week. Take care, everybody.